headlines. A group of South Korean lawmakers crossed the border into North Korea as part of its parliamentary audit of the Inner Korean Industrial Zone that has recently resumed operations after a 5-month hiatus. Despite a flurry of diplomatic activities aimed at restarting the long-stalled six-party denuclearization talks, the United States and China still differ on what North Korea must do first as a precondition for re-engagement. Korea's industrial output fell in September from a month earlier, large strikes by unionized workers at local automakers. Experts say, however, the drop is just a blip, not a trend. With these stories and more next on Primetime News. Good evening and welcome to Primetime News. It's Wednesday, October 30th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I am Yoo Ji-hye.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thank you so much for joining us. We begin with the cross-border visit by a group of South Korean lawmakers to the Inner Korean Joint Business Park in North Korea. The delegation spent the entire day at the industrial complex in Kaesong as part of its parliamentary inspection. Our Unification Ministry correspondent Hwang Sung-hee reports on the journey.
A 21-member delegation from the National Assembly's Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee made a rare visit to the Kaesong Industrial Complex on Wednesday. The trip marks the first time lawmakers have visited the Joint Business Park under the Park Geun-hye administration and was part of the Parliament's ongoing annual audit of the government. It was a full day that included a briefing on the current state of the complex, a tour of the factories and facilities, as well as a meeting with South Korean businessmen with operations there. Upon returning, the lawmakers said the trip was very productive.
There were many practical and useful discussions when we got a chance to chat with the resident companies in Kaesong. All the information will be discussed at the two-day parliamentary audit starting tomorrow, and we will hold additional discussions on issues that require additional review.
Operations at Kaesong came to a halt in April when North Korea pulled all of its workers out amid an escalation in inter-Korean tensions. The factories began running again in September after Pyongyang promised to prevent future unilateral closures following a series of talks between the two Koreas. Noting the significance of the Kaesong inter-Korean, the lawmakers pledged to cooperate on issues regarding the normalization of the industrial zone, sparking hope for progress on Seoul's efforts to revitalize the business park. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Despite a flurry of diplomatic activities aimed at restarting the long-stalled six-party talks, the United States and China still differ on what Korea must do first as a condition.
Our handout between the two political heavyweights.
China's top nuclear envoy Wu Da-wei says he's confident the stalled multilateral dialogue on North Korea's nuclear issue will resume. Speaking after talks with his U.S. counterpart Glenn Davies in Washington, Wu said the process of making the reopening of the six-party talks. He also said Beijing and Washington hard to bring Pyongyang back to the negotiating table. China's efforts have raised hopes the six nations involved in the talks, the two Koreas, China, the U.S., Japan, and Russia, will come together for the first time since late 2008. But it won't be all smooth sailing as the U.S. and North Korea are sticking to their own preconditions for re-engaging in the talks. Washington first wants to see and verifiable steps North Korea is denuclearizing. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is urging the North to comply with international nuclear non-proliferation guidelines.
And I will say that it is not words alone as we call on North Korea to comply with its international obligations. We need to move forward. We need to see how North Korea will respond.
The U.S. also says dismantling the North's nuclear program should be the core agenda of the talks. Pyongyang is unwilling to make the first steps in denuclearizing before the talks resume, also demanding other political and economic issues be discussed. Experts say North Korea is attempting to link the nuclear talks with other issues, such as the lifting of sanctions. The outcome of the talks between Wu Da-wei and Glenn Davies will be unveiled soon. It remains to be seen if China can satisfy both the U.S. and North Korea as the single most important mediator between the two sides. 한다은, Arirang News.
The foreign experts take developments surrounding the peninsula. We bring in Dr. Kim Chol-woo, Senior Research Fellow at Korea Institute for Defense Analyses. Welcome to the program.
Great to be here.
Well, Professor, today we seem to be on an upswing in inter-Korean relations. North Korea allowed South Korean lawmakers to visit the Kaesong Industrial Complex. Should we view this as a goodwill gesture, an olive branch?
So I would say the branch is okay, but that olive branch is so changeable. So I think it's too early to say having wishful thinking to have a good full-blown relationship. But as a media splash, having South Korean lawmakers within Kaesong Industrial Complex is a good way as an effective icebreaker of North and South Korean relations.
Dr. Kim, will today's visit by South Korean lawmakers have a positive effect on normalizing operations at the Kaesong Industrial Complex or even lay a foundation to transform itself into an international industrial hub?
All big events starting from the very small significant initiative. I think the overall we can buy this gesture as a very significant gesture to open up their Kaesong Industrial Complex and even to the eastern side of Mountain Kumgang and North and South Korean family reunion. But let's think about it. They abruptly stopped the so-called humanitarian North and South Korean family reunion. But before that, a couple of days ago, they repatriated 6 South Koreans on the humanitarian basis. So I think the overall North Korea's decision-making swing is sometimes too pendulumatic enough. So it's very hard to, what is the consistent, persistent theme is it?
So what's your take on the latest satellite images that show activity heating up at one of their nuclear test sites? Is there something to be gained from North Korea showing another provocation in the near future?
Simple answer is that what comes next? North Korea's pressuring international community, South Korea, particularly the United States, because imagery intelligence from the United States all comes from Washington. So if you don't agree our gesture, our initiative, what comes next? Next comes forced nuclear test. So they are pushing even Washington to the decision table. So in reverse side of the coin is the United States, oh, we are running out so-called strategications. Strategications is over. Washington is strategically demanding to the Seoul and even Pyongyang.
All right, so against this backdrop, the U.S. and China are working on a roadmap aimed at resuming the 6-party talks. While the two sides are still divided over the precondition to restart the dialogue, how likely is that the negotiations will get back on track?
Very critical. The activity of this region is getting stronger and stronger. But security side is lots of different stories, different strategic communications happening here in Korea. I think the Chinese strategic setting at this point is try to attract or a little bit strategically detach Seoul from Washington and pushing theirs to the Seoul side. But still, we have to consider China's factor to solve the North Korean nuclear issues.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your insights on the latest updates in North Korea.
It's a tough question, as always.
All right. Thank you very much.
Before your day ends, get the latest news live from Seoul.
Residents whose features
restrictions is on the rise.
closing ceremony.
Expert analysis from Asia's heartbeat.
The legislature circumstances
With a viewpoint only Korea's global network can provide.
the United States, the latest report, less than a
Unrivaled access from a always on standby.
Came on to New York, South true intentions to maintaining confrontation. But today was an election day for Koreans living in some parts of the country where 2 vacant parliamentary seats were up for grabs. The polls closed at 8 p.m. and we now have a rough picture of the winners.
So let's go over to our political correspondent Kim Yeon-ji standing by at the news center for an early outlook. Yeon-ji, it was a small but important election.
That's right, Sean. Today's by-election was small in scale with only 2 regions casting votes, the Hwasong A District in Gyeonggi Province and the South Pohang Ulleung Island District in North Gyeongsang Province. While the preliminary results of today's elections are out, let's take a look. In Hwasong A, Seo Chung-won of the ruling Saenuri Party is leading with 60% of the votes, followed by Oh Il-yong of the main opposition Democratic Party with 27%. Hong Sang-gyu of the minor opposition Unified Progressive Party is a distant third with 8.5%. Now, in South Pohang Ulleung, it looks like the ruling party's candidate Park Myung-jae, former Minister of Public Administration, is on course to win the election by a large margin. Park has roughly 81% support, while Ho Dae-man of the main opposition Democratic Party has 17%. Well, about 46% of the votes have been counted in Hwasong A and 36% in South Pohang Ulleung. The voter turnout for today's election was not very high, though. About 30% of eligible voters cast ballots in A, while about 30% did in South Pohang Ulleung. Final results are expected later this evening.
Now, Yeon-ji, given that both regions are traditional strongholds of the ruling Saenuri Party, a victory by the ruling party doesn't seem that surprising. So what significance do these election results have?
Chie, observers say the outcome of today's election is sure to bring about a major power shift within the ruling party. But the ruling party's Seo will enter the National Assembly as a 7th-term lawmaker. Seo, who's considered one of the closest allies of President Park Geun-hye, outranks 2 key pro-Park figures, Representatives Kim Moo-sung and Choi Kyung-hwan, in terms of seniority, which tends to carry significant weight in Korean politics. Lawmaker Kim Moo-sung is serving his 5th term, while Choi Kyung-hwan, who's the floor leader of the ruling party at the moment, is serving his 3rd term. And that's why many believe Seo's victory today will definitely bring about a major power shift within the ruling party.
All right, Kim Yeon-ji, thank you so much. That was Kim Yeon-ji reporting live on the 2 by-elections held on Wednesday here in Korea.
The President Park Geun-hye is expected to make a policy speech at the National Assembly sometime in mid-November.
The senior presidential secretary for public relations told reporters on Wednesday that the ruling and opposition parties are currently discussing a new schedule for her speech. A presidential policy speech usually focuses on the budget for the upcoming year, but this year, with the rival parties still divided on a controversial probe over illegal electioneering by the nation's spy agency, there's growing speculation that President Park might include political topics in this speech as well. And delving deeper on the economic front, Korea's industrial output saw its biggest drop in 6 months in September, largely brought down by partial strikes of the nation's car makers.
But the fall is seen as a blip, not a significant backpedaling in the path of recovery. Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
It was a reminder that the country's still feeble economic recovery could be derailed by an unforeseen shock. Statistics Korea said Wednesday that the nation's industrial output 2.1% in September from the previous month, the sharpest pace of contraction in 6 months. The drop was a reversal from a 1.6% rise in August. The statistics agency, however, attributed the fall to partial strikes by unionized workers at local automakers Hyundai Motor and Kia Motors, and added that without that factor, the nation's industrial output would have expanded for the month of September as well. Economists agree that the drop in output does not indicate a major setback for the Korean economy.
Overall, the numbers show that the Korean economy is on the path to recovery after sluggish growth over the past 2 years. But it's still hard to say the recovery is at full strength.
Output of services sector that is driven by domestic demand kept improving last month, gaining by 0.3% from August. Despite the worse than expected output data, the central bank said last week that the nation's gross domestic product grew 3.3% in the July to September period from a year earlier. First time it has topped 5% since the 2011. On a brighter note, the central bank survey showed Wednesday that Korean manufacturers' confidence rose to a 16-month high in October based on their assessment of the business outlook for the coming months. 황지혜, Arirang News.
Moving now to the finance minister's warning about the nation's economy. Despite the recent flurry of good news, Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok says it's still too early to be optimistic about an economic recovery. Our Yu Lian has more on how he wants to help boost businesses through investment and hiring.
The Korean government appears determined to spur efforts to accelerate the nation's economic recovery. Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok told a meeting of economic ministers on Wednesday that improving economic indicators released recently are not strong and extensive enough to remain optimistic about future economic performances. Those indicators included a better-than-expected 3.3% GDP growth, a large current account surplus that has stayed in the black for the past 20 months, and an improving consumer confidence level that hit a 17-month high in October. The finance minister said external uncertainties, particularly over the timing of the U.S. tapering of its stimulus programs, toughening competition with countries like China and Japan, are potential factors that could hurt Korea's recovery, making new investments and job creation more essential for a full-blown recovery. Promising steps to streamline red tapes, Hyun said 1,800 businesses will begin benefiting from a government fund for soft loans in the next 2 months. The finance ministry announced tax incentives to help expedite investment. Small and medium-sized companies will have their tariffs reduced by as much as 20 percentage points for machinery imports and enjoy greater accounting flexibility in handling depreciating costs to help reduce tax payments until next March. Yu Lian, Arirang News.
Taking you now to Washington, Congress grilled top U.S. intelligence officials over the size and scope of the United States spying activities. Our Kim Hyun-bin reports on how officials defended themselves against the spying allegations.
America's top intelligence chiefs were hauled up before a House committee Tuesday to explain their agency's actions amid a series of reports on the scope of the National Security Agency's surveillance activities.
The rules and oversight that govern us ensure we do what the American people want us to do, which is protect our nation's security and our people's liberties. So I'll repeat, we do not spy on anyone except for valid foreign intelligence purposes, and we only work within the law.
Clapper added that the U.S. did not indiscriminately spy on other nations. Other nations spy on U.S. officials as a matter of routine. NSA Director General Keith Alexander defended his agency, telling the committee that the NSA's main focus was preventing attacks on Americans and allies, and that it operates under strict oversight. Alexander also called European media reports that said the NSA collected data on tens of millions of phone calls in France, Spain, and Italy completely false.
To be perfectly clear, this is not information that we collected on European citizens. It represents information that we and our NATO allies have collected in defense of our countries and in support of military operations.
The allegations of U.S. spying have forced the White House to promise reforms, and even acknowledge gathering activities may have gone too far. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
And now to the world's first sea tunnel linking 2 continents. Turkey unveiled the world's first underwater intercontinental railway tunnel on Tuesday, becoming part of a modern Silk Road. The Marmaray runs 60 meters, connecting the Asian and European sides of Istanbul, and has a span of 13 kilometers. The project cost around $2.8 billion, and the railway is expected to see an average of 1.5 million passengers a day. And back here in the nation, Korea's Culture Ministry and the largest internet service, Google, are joining hands to bring Korean culture, from pop music to more traditional cultural contents, online to users all across the globe. Arirang News' cultural correspondent Park Ji-won tells us how.
Korean Culture Minister Yoo Jin-young and Google CEO Eric Schmidt said Wednesday the Korean government and Google will work together to Korean cultural
online. She also said Google will provide financial support to the Hangul Museum, set to open next year, but did not specify the amount. The announcement was made at a press conference at the Hangul Museum in Seoul on Wednesday.
I believe that Google will be a great help to us and that we can contribute to Google. This is just the beginning. I hope will be a bigger partnership in our two institutions.
The Korean culture spans 5,000 years, 6,000 years, a long, long time. Google is very old. Google is 15 years old, right? So as a respectful but ambitious teenager, it's a pleasure for me to learn from both the richness of culture, but also to help share it with the rest of the world.
Google has been adding cultural content from Korea to its online platforms since 2011, with everything from K-pop concerts and films to modern and traditional art. For example, people can see cultural heritage items from the National Museum of Korea online. Amid the collaboration between the Korean government and the search engine, the Google Cultural Institute, which displays the cultural assets from more than 300 institutions from 44 countries, ranging from architecture to art, recently launched new partnerships with 4 Korean cultural institutions, including the Korea Database Agency and the Lee Young-hee Korea Museum. Through the Google Cultural Institute collection, anyone with internet access can now appreciate the beauty of the traditional clothing and houses known as hanbok and hanok. Altogether, the site will display some 10,000 Korean cultural items. The government expects the collaboration with Google to help carry Korean cultural content from K-pop to more traditional arts to more people around the world. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Figure skater is looking to come back from her foot injury within the next 2 months.
And Stephen Che joins us in the Sports Center to tell us about her progress. Stephen.
Hey guys, figure skating champion Kim Yeona has said that she's eyeing a December comeback from the injury to her right foot. At Media Day for the 100-day countdown until the Sochi Winter Olympics, said that her overall condition was at 70%. And that she's able to skate and even practice jumps. But most importantly, the 23-year-old gold medalist also told reporters at the Taenung National Training Center that she was confident leading up to the games. Calling Sochi her swan song, she expressed hope for a greater experience than in any of her past competitions. Based on past experiences, fans can expect her back in full force come December. Let's now move on to the Korean series. Thursday's Game 6 will have the Tusan Bears' Dustin Nipper taking on the Samsung Lions' Rick Vandenherk on the mound. Both teams have earned the much-needed rest as the series continues on in the Lions' home of Daegu. The extra day of rest has allowed both starters who met in Game 2 5 full days of rest and a chance to earn their team the win. The Bears are just a win away from being crowned champions, while Samsung looks to force a series-deciding Game 7. Now let's finish off with Wednesday's top KBL matchups, starting with the KCC Aegis taking on the Dongbu Promi in Jeonju. First half action has Dongbu in control with top rookie Tu Kyung for 13. However, there's just not enough for Dongbu after that. KCC's twin centers Tyler Wilkerson and Darian Towns each scored 20, with Towns pulling in 12 boards for the double-double, and KCC takes it 78-67. Meanwhile, the Eastland Elephants and AGC went head in Incheon. Both teams struggle in the first half, but then the Elephants' Ricardo Powell comes alive in the fourth, finishing with 22 and 11. ET Lands wins this low-scoring affair 63-53. That does it for me here in the Sports Center. This has been Stephen Che. Check back at midnight for the latest in the world of sports.
If you've noticed, Seoul got hit with fine dust from China yesterday, but things cleared up this Wednesday morning.
Yes, for details, let's go over to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, what's the latest?
Good evening. The fine dust problem is one that is likely to stick with us until spring due to winds blowing from the northwest. So young children and the elderly should take precautions to avoid respiratory problems. Now taking a look at the live map, as you can see, we have fairly clear skies across the map due to a high pressure system from Bohai Bay in the West Sea. Now tomorrow is shaping up to be another bright autumn day here in Korea. The big temperature gap between the days and nights will continue, so if you're taking the Korean SATs next week, take extra care of your health. Otherwise, enjoy the sun you can, for it may on Sunday. Head at tomorrow's numbers. Seoul drops to 5 degrees in the morning with a high of 17. Meanwhile, Gwangju and Busan should hit 20 degrees. Moving on, Jeju reaches 19 degrees, all the while Dokdo and Kumgang should get up to 17 and 11 degrees respectively. That's all for now, and back to you guys.
Thanks, Bo-kyung, and that's our broadcast on this Wednesday night. I'm Yuji Hae in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.